let that little doohickey go down. Right down? Okay. Jeez. So, Alexander has just fought his third, and as it happens, final battle against Darius III at Gaugamela. It might be Gaugamela in the Alexander mosaic, it might be Issus, it might be Granicus, it might be some uber compilation of Alexander in battle against Darius. There were only three, they were all big, they were cataclysmic, they were all major victories for Alexander and defeats for Darius, who at the end of the third battle retreated with a small group and committed suicide shortly thereafter, which cleared the way for Alexander to do what nobody had ever been able to imagine for 200 years, which was enter Persepolis, the capital of the Persian Empire, as a conqueror. And as enlarged as Alexander's own sense of himself must have been by then, especially after that nice meeting with Dad at the Siwa Oasis with the Egyptian god Ammon, Persepolis could not have helped but dazzle, as it would anybody entering today. You're looking at a group of people walking through the gate of Xerxes at the one end of the terrace. Among the visions that would have greeted Alexander when he entered the plateau would have been the palaces of the kings. This is the palace of the namesake of Darius III, the palace of Darius I. The palaces of the kings were on the terrace along with all the government buildings at Persepolis. It was one huge royal and administrative and ceremonial compound. All those functions were together in one place for Near Eastern kings. And the palaces were decorated with relief sculpture. You see some of that relief sculpture here on the facade. The door jambs were decorated as well. This is one of the door jambs in the palace of Darius, and it shows the king himself with ease, with ease and no fear and no apparent muscular tension whatsoever, engaging a lion. They are the same height, and the lion is, the lion doesn't actually look like he's working very hard either. You could almost imagine their ballroom dancing. I'm very fond of this relief. So it would have conveyed to Alexander that he was in a world where a king was definitely regarded as the link to the divine, much, much more than a mortal. This is not a conception that was around in the Greek world at all. Alexander's men encamped at Persepolis for a little while, but before he left, he burned it. He burned the site and the palaces and all the buildings. And before doing that, he took all the money that was in the treasury, all the gold, all the everything. And so all of the financing of the rest of the campaign was predicated on the goods from the treasuries of the Persian kings at Persepolis. Excavations here in the treasury of Persepolis have found along the walls marks of especially hot burning, as if there were small fires made, like the marks that fire investigators look for when they look for arson. So it's clear that a fire was quite deliberately set inside the structure. Within a year, Alexander was on the march again, all the way across the great desert of the Iranian plateau and on across the Hindu Kush into Afghanistan in 329. He made it to Kabul. In 326 and 325 to India, where the coins of Alexander now include representations of him with elephant skull cap to go along with the other sorts of nutty headgear that is depicted on his coins. And in India, his army said, that's it. We've had it. We are not proceeding any further. I guess Alexander probably would have just kept on going to China, except that his army simply refused. And so he turned around and came back. The navy coming along through the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, the cavalry and the supplies going along the southern rim of the Iranian plateau, below modern-day Pakistan and down through Iran. In December 325, he reached the Straits of Hormuz, and finally in 323 made it all the way back to Babylon, where one might reasonably assume he was going to stay for a while and establish his bona fides as a king and cosmic deity in the grand Near Eastern tradition. But on June 10th, in the year 323, he died. Alexander was a man who accomplished more than anybody could have imagined when he lived, and it's still more than we can imagine today. And he achieved heroic, legendary, and divine status while he was still alive. The persona was carefully crafted and disseminated largely through his portraits on coins. Alexander coinage was widespread. We find Alexander coins all across the regions that he conquered. The coins that you're looking at, Alexander with the lion's head helmet of Heracles, Alexander with the horns of Ammon, Alexander with the elephant head helmet, which he donned after his conquests in India, do not succeed one another. All of them were, once the design was made, they were all in production, all in constant production, and disseminated around his kingdom. What sort of hero was Alexander? What sort of hero was he? What are the characteristics of Alexander? Alexander was called in his lifetime and well after the new Achilles. The new Achilles. The old Achilles no longer quite good enough. The old Achilles pales. What's new? What kind of hero is Alexander? What are his characteristics? You might have a little chat.
I was counting on doing a senior thesis with you.
Sorry. It's all right. That was one of the reasons I asked you the other day when you were graduating.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that.
Oh well, I'm just gonna have to suck it up and go to Cooper.
Yeah, you are. Sorry
Is there
about
anyone
that.
else that's decent somewhat reasonable for theses? Or?
Depends what you want to do. There's a new hire in art history who does late antique Rome and the Eastern frontier, Rome and Parthia. So that could be, he probably can advise on stuff that's, earlier. So he seems like a really good guy, so you might want to talk to him.
All right.
I would suggest going to meet him.
Sure. Because I just don't like Cooper's style, and
I don't blame you.
what's her face is...
Sheila.
Yeah. She's just too out of it.
I know.
So, all right.
We can talk about it.
I was going to do an email thesis with you.
I'm just waiting for the day that I fall down one of these steps in the dark. I know it's about to happen. Right. I'm running out of chances. All right. What do you think? So he has many conquests and many travels. He's gotten around. Yep. Something else.
Well, both him and Achilles were a leader, but when you hear about Achilles, it's usually like one-on-one fighting. With Alexander,
Alexander is within a group very regularly. He's part of his. He leads his men in hunting, in battle.
Just adding on to that, Achilles was seen almost exclusively as the warrior, the fighter, and Alexander was a lot more than that. I mean, yes, he was a warrior, but he was also, a leader in general. He was also, in some respects, considered divine. So he was really kind of the whole shebang.
Alexander has a greater skill set, right? So he's a strategist. He's a general. This is part of seeing him in the context of others and not fighting simply alone. It's not about only his own persona. It's about his ability to interact with others and the array of skills that entails.
Achilles accepted and embraced his mortality, but Alexander tried to get away from that.
Yeah, Alexander is very specifically casting himself as as an immortal.
I wouldn't say that that's attempting to escape that, anything like that. He just isn't embracing mortality. Just trying to make sure these he was an eccentric. He was a really crazy life. I'm sure he had a young death, so he didn't really get pulled in. So while he was alive, he lived to a mythological background about where
he knows the story of Achilles. He carried the Iliad that Aristotle gave him all the way to India. And it looks as if, because these coins are issued well before he even gets to Persepolis, the coins with him with the horns of Ammon. And so he is not, in this guy's looking as if he accepts that the way he'll live on is the way that Achilles lived on, in song and with this poetic young tragic death. This does not appear to be part of his game plan in this regard. Did you hand up?
Achilles was a hero of the
Alexander is in the here and now. He is current events. He is real. And many of the guises in which you see him are real. Real battles, real hunts. He did not confine the portrayal of himself in his actions and in his persona to some otherworldly plane. He quite deliberately has himself engaged in real-time, real-world pursuits. That's acceptable to him. He is at one and the same moment in this world and transcending it. So, for example, on the Alexander sarcophagus, where he's on his own with the lion's head helmet. You.
He's kind of he's more the ideal of the Greeks, they started seeing people as they're more thoughtful as opposed to just brute force. They were kind of higher up. So while he's the strategist and the leader, he's kind of seen above Achilles, where Achilles just, I'm going to go kill something. And then Alexander's like, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it really well.
With flair. Alexander, in each of the portrayals where he's in action, is a little bit set apart. He's a little bit highlighted, and he has his style. Alexander, his style is flourish, right? The comparisons that you're making with Alexander and Achilles is, to some extent, the Achilles of the Iliad, right? The Achilles that you're thinking of in the context of the epic. And that was a persona that certainly was alive and well in this era. It wasn't only Alexander who read who read the Iliad. In fact, in Egypt, for hundreds of years, the papyri that we have recovered from Egypt, the single most common text is the Iliad. So it was the bestseller of the day.
I think just as Achilles is obsessed with his own story, I think that was Alexander as well. Like when he goes to grab Achilles' armor, stop off there, and when he stops off to cut a knot, and also to kind of declare himself son of God. And I think that it's very telling that he would stop. His men told him that he wants to stop, because I think that he wanted to keep going to die in battle as Achilles did. So I think it's something to note that I think he would have kept going.
Yeah, he absolutely, he stage manages his every move, and he's clearly very conscious of it. I mean, he goes to these specific places, and, to travel with a biographer and historian is already, it's like nowadays, it seems like every presidential candidate has some person following them around, writing it all down so they can make a documentary afterwards. Sometimes not for good, apparently. But Alexander is the one who starts this. So yes, he goes to Troy, he goes to Gordian, and one has to assume that there were artists recording, for example, some of the aspects of some of these battles that took place. But the persona of Achilles, or any hero, from epic, is not the only way in which Greeks by this time regarded their heroes. So what, up until the time of Alexander, if you were a Greek in Athens or in the Peloponnese, going to Olympia, going to the sanctuary at Delphi, looking at these stories up on these temples, looking at the statuary, going down to the potter's quarter to buy a vase, what had you decided that a hero had turned into? So the concept of the hero from epic had been changed in the 5th and early 4th centuries. That idea of in battle and the physical prowess that would allow somebody one-on-one to confront anybody in battle and win wasn't actually the primary way by this time that most mainland Greeks would have regarded or conceived of a hero. So, what was the idea of a hero down to about the time of Alexander? Now, this, you are going to talk to each other, and you're going to go back to think about all the stuff that, for example, you were just talking about last week when we had discussion.
One of the grants I applied for this week was a last minute GRPP to go to France this summer for like a few weeks and do some of my surveys at the museums and stuff.
With who? Who are you going to work with?
Well, I did it with Peter because he's my advisor, but I'm going to go by myself.
Right, no, but I meant which, I mean, I know that you have to have a faculty member that writes, that you organize yourself with, so it would be Peter.
Yeah, so I'm going to just get my heritage stuff done.
I hope you get it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice award.
And then like another 1,000 from the department or something. But years across.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay. Tell me something. Everyday heroes, in what way? Heroes don't need to fight to be heroes. In what other ways are they shown as everyday heroes or people? So one of the ways in which heroes are humanized, have been humanized, is that they have emotions that you can relate to. They have activities that you can relate to. What else? Look at the persona of, if it's either Achilles or some warrior, on the Achilles painter Lekythos here, or the Doryphoros. Where are they looking? What do you think?
I guess I can't say that they're not looking up, they're looking more down. I don't know if that would be maybe like, they're symbolizing less of a distance between regular people and heroes.
Yeah.
They're looking towards somebody. Away.
Right, right. So in the Lighthouse here, for example, Achilles and the lady are making eye contact, right? They're looking straight at one another. Now, in a freestanding sculpture, there's nobody else but you. The sculptor can create that figure to do one of two things: engage with you in your space, on your plane, or stand away from you, be deliberately quite separate, not engage with you. In the Doryphoros, you can imagine this guy looking, you and he looking at the same thing. His gaze is level. So what are a couple, so this is the world of heroic identity that Alexander knows. That's what he knows. That's what he grows up with. That's what he inherits. And if you believe the Vergina facade painting of the tomb, that is the ethos he sets out quite early on to mold to his own vision. What changes, specific changes, does Alexander conceive of to transform the notion of hero to one that better suits his vision? Have a little chat.
I'm gonna try to get the rest of my poster done today.
Oh, good.
And then, because they don't do printing at our printing center in the basement anymore, on our side of campus. So I'm like, shoot, I have to send it out to like 28th and Carmel, or like go to a Kinko's to make sure I can get it by next week. So I was like, shoot, because I found that out yesterday. So I'll try to get it done today and email it to you. And then if you can just like look over the text or give me any suggestions. Will you be by a computer tomorrow?
Yeah.
All right. Then I'll try to drop off
I'm always by a computer. Except for this past weekend when I was away from the internet, to your disadvantage. Oh, is this yours? Somebody left an umbrella here. Oh. Oh. Huh. Okay, all the way in the back. Tell me something. Yeah, good. That's what you get for volunteering. But the question here is, what's different? So Alexander inherits this conception of a hero. And some things are the same. Some things are the same. What's the same? Is this guy in battle? Is this guy in battle? What's the same? What does Alexander say? Okay, this will work. I'll keep this. What's the same?
I guess he's the ultimate humanization in that he's real.
Meaning, what do you mean? You mean that he looks like a guy?
Well, no, that he's a real person. Because I mean, weren't we trying to humanize the heroes before, and now that he's real, he's like the ultimate humanization. Can you explain that better?
Maybe. But I'm just thinking of, yeah, maybe. But thinking about, these, these guys are completely realistic looking. It's not like there's something about them that you say, okay, this I cannot possibly identify with this guy. He's not real. In fact, they're very deliberately real. So, yeah, it's true that Alexander allows himself to think, I can cast myself in the heroic mode, even though I'm a regular mortal person. But just in terms of what aspects of, what does Alexander here have in common, for example, with the Doryphoros by Polyclitus? What does Alexander say? This is good. I'll keep this aspect. What do you think? I don't think this is hard. I mean, to me, this is really obvious.
Physical problem.
He's a good-looking dude, right? We don't actually have any idea exactly how Alexander looked. This is, I suppose that to some extent this bears the same relationship to his precise looks as your high school yearbook photo has to you. You might look like yourself, but improved in that picture. so that idealized, perfect beauty, young. Of course, he was young. That he keeps. So that part he keeps. But what is new? What at least a couple of things that Alexander tweaks or adds. He is very careful about depicting his image. That's true. So my question is, what is it about his image that what does he do exactly? Yeah, he's very concerned about it. That's true. Hold on.
He's no longer the way that heroes were depicted. He's no longer looking at someone or engaging.
So what's he doing?
Well, for instance, on Coinage and a lot in our book about the way that he was always with his head turned and gaze up off the distance.
So what can you see on this? Where's he looking on the coins? He's got this far horizon gaze. So we've moved from the level gaze, where the person is interacting directly with you, to what our former president so lovingly called the vision thing. Alexander has the vision thing in spades.
The exact opposite of humanizing heroes. Instead of going out of your way to create a hero as human, he goes out of his way to show himself as human.
He really does tweak that piece all 180 degrees.
Not so much, just like with the hero, you still know that it's a hero, but just in a more, this, you still know he's a human, but
Right. Alexander completely puts the brakes on the we're all part of the same, we could go play cards together kind of idea of the hero. You cannot imagine the great Ezekias Amphora. If Alexander would see that, he would say, no, that is not for me. He, in all of the ways in which we see him, yes, it's deliberate, it's stage managed, he's very careful about it, and what he's careful about is to make sure that while he's engaged in real activities, specific events, and he himself is recognizable, at least by virtue of the fact that he always looks pretty much exactly the same every single time you see him, that he is in a already divinizing mode. So from the trend of a hero being brought down to earth, we go opposite to a hero, the way that the heroic ideal long ago had been, where a hero is the stepping stone between mortal and divine. What about if this is the classic canon of the hero, the Doryphoros, what else does Alexander change? Oh, yes, usually wearing clothes. Yes, although, I mean, I just haven't actually shown that we do have full-length nude, heroic nude statues of him. So in the scenes we've seen, he's wearing clothes.
He's always on a horse.
He's in action. Actually, we have two modes for Alexander. One is in a scene, so the Regina painting, the Alexander sarcophagus, the Alexander mosaic, which is almost certainly a great battle painting that a lot of people would have seen. He's in action. Just standing around being heroic doesn't cut it. Just standing around is not enough. But when he is not in a scene, then he quite deliberately is this otherworldly, not of the same plane creature. Whether we have a full-length statue of him, heroically nude, like the Doryphoros, or a portrait head such as this one, which comes from the site of Pella in northern Greece. Here you see captured perfectly the essential difference between the new Achilles and the old conception of the heroic Achilles, with Alexander's neck turned slightly so that his gaze looks upward, and that far away vision, as if, right, if it wouldn't have been for his men stopping him, he would have kept on going.
I just want to come back to the mental thing, because for me, Alexander, I think where the Greeks had gotten in their philosophical ideas at that time, and he was educated by Aristotle and things like that, I think Alexander was one of the first guys to say, you know, instead of life just happening to me, now the philosophers, because I can have a philosophy of life, and I can plan my own life and look toward my own future, or look at the future instead of just letting it happen.
Alexander is an action hero.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what I see most about him, is like having, because of the philosophical ideas that were around, and you know, it was a stew at that time.
It's a little hard to know whether any
Or you think it was all ego?
He was brought up to conquer Persia. You know, that's what his dad was going to do, and he was a teenager when all of those plans were being made, and then his dad died, and it was cast essentially as his inevitable destiny. I think that after the fact, what people might have looked on and said is, this shows us that you can, you know, take life in your own hands, and et cetera, et cetera. But the philosophical schools that arise in are, I think, to a large extent, pretty far removed from the day-to-day business that Alexander was engaged in. At least for him. I mean, later scholars might have connected more of those dots. All right. Well, Alexander dies. He has traveled all over. He has conquered the entirety of the Achaemenid Empire, but he has made no plans for actually administering it or running it, and that falls to the men who are around him when he dies in Babylon. And those men were his generals. They were all a great deal older than him, battle-hardened, savvy veterans, and they pretty much immediately start fighting with each other, and various of them make land grabs. The two strongest and the two who inherit the greatest bulk of the lands that Alexander conquered are Ptolemy I and Seleucus I, and they give their names to the two largest of the imperial entities that succeed Alexander: the Ptolemaic world, which you see on this map in orange, and the Seleucid kingdom in green. They both are the founders of dynasties that continue for a couple of hundred years, and they do a certain amount of fighting with each other, and there's a lot of internal politics, but we will not be paying too much attention to that. Ptolemy is the smartest of them all, for sure, because while in territory the region that he takes over is smaller than the territory that Seleucus takes over, it's a lot more manageable. And it has a couple great advantages. The first of which is that it has this enormous new city that is already a flourishing concern on the Mediterranean that Alexander himself had founded, Alexandria. And it is to Alexandria that Ptolemy actually had conveyed the funeral procession and sarcophagus of Alexander himself, and Alexander was brought to be buried in a specially built tomb at Alexandria, which has never been found, although every so often you'll read in the newspaper about somebody who thinks they're getting close. Well, we really have no idea. So Alexandria was a fantastic, huge cosmopolitan city on the Mediterranean, and we know almost nothing about it from the Ptolemaic period, so we aren't really going to talk about it too much. The other big advantage of Egypt was that it has its own internal highway in the Nile, and this much more readily managed area of land on either side of it, with lots of access to various ports through the Red Sea and through the Mediterranean. So it was a more rulable world than that of Seleucus. Alexandria, had one of the great wonders of the ancient world, the Lighthouse, the Great Lighthouse, huge, called the Pharos, Pharos. We're starting to knock off the wonders. The seven wonders of the ancient world is actually is a list that was made by scholars who lived and worked in Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE. And it was a way to categorize the wonders of the Greek world, of the world that had been conquered by Alexander and the world that preceded him. And it's kind of cute that in that regard their lighthouse is one of the things on the list. It's a little hard to imagine if anybody else would have put that on the list, although it was apparently really great lighthouse. There you see it in a reconstruction drawing, this nice reconstruction drawing that shows the walls of the city, the palaces of the kings down here towards the harbor. What we have today in Alexandria is a modern city that's built up over pretty much all of this, but below ground, ancient Alexandria is well represented in its tombs. And in the tombs, you get a very clear idea of the one of the two constituent populations of Alexandria, and that constituent population was Macedonians, was Greeks who settled here in the city, and we get that sense from their burial items. So these are urns that would have held the cremated ashes of the dead, and then the cremated the urns were placed inside these slots, and the decorations. And so these would have been for relatively poor people. And the decorations on the urns, for example, this one shows a heroically nude guy engaged in an animal hunt. Yep.
Is this because these were Macedonians or the Macedonians?
Well, we don't actually know. We don't actually know necessarily exactly who is in one of these urns. The fronts of the urns were covered with placards, stone placards that were painted or sculpted, and they have very regularly Greek inscriptions painted or incised on them with Greek names. For the most part, we assume that these are essentially Greek immigrants, emigrants who have moved to Alexandria. There's nothing that would have stopped people from adopting a Greek name and writing in Greek. There were Greek tutors in the country. But at least in the very initial generation or two, the likelihood is that they're Greeks. So the style of both of these and most of the other covers over these tombs is clearly Greek. This pose should remind you of, for example, one of the writers on the Parthenon frieze, and the lady looking pensive here with the child or the servant offering her a harp is reminiscent, for example, of Glycala, whose tombstone you saw from the cemetery in Athens. Same sort of pose, same sort of piece of furniture even, practically identical chair. And this is middle of the 4th century BCE, and this is probably about 300 or so, or the very early years of the 3rd century. In addition to Macedonian or Greek population, Egypt had, of course, a continuing very, very large native Egyptian population, whom the Ptolemies catered to quite assiduously by reconstructing or constructing anew sanctuaries to Egyptian deities. So this temple, for example, down in Upper Egypt at Dendera, the Temple of Hathor, here's the facade, was built by the Ptolemies. As it happens today, it's the best preserved Egyptian temple in the country. You can go all the way up to the ceiling and stand on it and look out. And subsequent Ptolemaic rulers added relief sculptures and gave gifts to the rulers. So the Ptolemies in their country, in the country of Egypt, recognized, adopted, supported the long-lived native cults of the people whom they had come to rule. The Ptolemies also made a special effort to support gods at another sanctuary, and this is the sanctuary of Samothrace, way up here in the northern part of the Aegean. Samothrace is a small island that had occupation from from the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and a sanctuary to a mysterious group of gods who were called by the Greeks the great gods, the megaloi theoi, the great gods, because nobody was allowed to speak their name. They were the gods of a mystery religion. And the sanctuary to the great gods at Samothrace was very old. It begins in the Iron Age, when lots of other sanctuaries around the Greek world are getting started. And the people who worshipped here and lived here were not Greeks. They wrote in the Greek alphabet, but the language that they spoke and that they wrote in was not the Greek language. So here, for example, is a fragment of a cup that was dedicated at the sanctuary of the great gods, and it's written in Greek, but the name on the cup is not Greek. It's the native language that people here spoke. And the sanctuary in its earliest days, in the Archaic and the Classical periods, had just one open air sort of theatral area and a small building in which gifts that were given to the deities were saved. It's called the Hall of Votive Gifts. Here's the theatral area in the Sanctuary of the Great Gods at Samothrace, and you see it's pretty small. It's called the theatral area because the steps are just organized kind of like a theater. But it was almost certainly the place at which rites, initiations, sacrifices would have been made. It was at the Sanctuary of the Great Gods that Philip II of Macedon met Olympias, who was a princess of the kingdom of Epirus and was at the sanctuary to be initiated into the rites, as was Philip. And he, in Romeo and Juliet fashion, espied her, I guess, across the theatral area, and eventually they got married. What were they doing there? They were there because people from other places besides Samothrace went to the sanctuary to be initiated in the mystery rites of the great gods. We don't have so much evidence in the classical period for Greeks from the mainland, Athens or cities in the Peloponnese, going to Samothrace, but from lots of the kingdoms in the periphery of the mainland of Greece, like Macedon or Epirus or the kingdoms on the Asia Minor coast, people came to be initiated into the rites. Because the Sanctuary of the Great Gods was such an important place to Philip, under him and under his successors, new buildings were added in Thanksgiving and to help assist in the operation of the cult. So one was a new and larger altar down here next to the Hall of Votive Gifts, number 12, which is called the altar court, a great big altar inside a large sort of enclosure wall with columns across the front. And you see that both of these are situated right down next to one of the two rivers that courses through the area of the sanctuary. So it's topographically varied and kind of dramatic. And just behind the Hall of Votive Gifts and the altar court was a long building that was called the Hieron. What you haven't seen in this sanctuary and what you won't see in this sanctuary is a standard Greek temple. There is no standard Greek temple in this sanctuary. The Hieron was the main structure in which people worshipped. So here's the Hall of Votive Gifts and the altar court, and you see that they are very ordinary looking buildings. They are just very typical Doric architecture, very simple. The Hall of Votive Gifts is really just a kind of stoa with some columns. The altar court is a little bit more elaborate, but there's nothing too fancy about it. No sculptural adornment, very simple. Here's a view looking down from across the riverbed, which is now filled in. The riverbed is right there. There's the area of the altar court and the Hall of Votive Gifts. And here is the Huron. Here it is when you get down closer to it. And inside, so here are the walls, the foundation walls. And this is what it would have been like inside. In other words, as opposed to a Greek temple where all of the activity would have been on the outside, the altar in which any sacrifices would have been made would have been on the outside. Maybe you would have gone inside to see the cult statue, but if you were going to be edified in any way by your experience with the temple, it would be from the magnificence of the architecture or the message of the sculpture on the exterior. The Huron, completely opposite, in a completely opposite way, is a place in which secret rites went on inside the building. There were these long benches that lined the walls and torches at the far end because it'd be dark inside there, so you would need lights. And we don't have any clear idea of exactly what went on inside here because it was a mystery religion and people didn't write about it specifically. They were enjoined not to do that. So over the course of the last couple of decades of the 4th century, the sanctuary is built up, most especially down in its core area where the altar and the room for dedications and the Huron itself are constructed. Arsinoe II was the daughter of Ptolemy I. And she was, in the early decades of the 3rd century BCE, the wife of King Lysimachus. He was one of the successors of Alexander, and he had seized the territories of Thrace and northern Asia Minor. And Ptolemy had married his daughter Arsinoe off to him when she was 15 years old, so that they would be allies. His territories were on the north of those of Seleucus, and Ptolemy was on the south, and so this was a kind of political alliance that could hold Seleucus' expansionist tendencies in check. Arsinoe commissions the building of this structure here, again, right down near the riverbed, after you enter the sanctuary, this little round thing, number 15, and that is called the Arsinoeon, and you see it here in far view. And here a little bit closer, the interior of it. These are the substructures of it. It had very deep substructures and very massive stones for the foundation course because it was an enormous unobstructed interior space, 20 meters in diameter. It was the largest unobstructed covered interior space in the Greek world. It was probably some sort of meeting house for the emissaries who came to the sanctuary. But beyond that, we don't really know exactly what. We know definitely that it was dedicated by Arsinoe because there's an inscription with her name. It was famous, very famous, far and wide, and this adorable funerary relief from a city in Asia Minor called Cyzicus shows a young girl holding what is almost certainly a little model of the Arsinoeon. Cyzicus is in Asia Minor. Samothrace is in the northern Aegean. what sort of world does a relief like this make sense in? So now what you want to do is take out your quotes. Take out your sheet of paper, your question set with your quotes. Oh, that she's holding?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think it could be either related to Zeno of Gideon or Meleager. And the fact that Meleager says at the end that we have this single homeland in the world, and so it kind of shows that unity across wherever the world is. It's kind of the same, but also in what Zeno writes about is that think of everyone as countrymen and fellow citizens. So again, that
Yeah, absolutely. This is a completely different vision of the world and one's place in it than what we've seen in the classical era. In the classical era, somebody from Asia Minor would come to Athens. They would admire the Parthenon. They might make some kind of sacrifice to Athena, but then they would go home where they would have their own temple, their own patron deity, their own city god or goddess, and their own sanctuary. And all sanctuaries were good. It wasn't like there was a competition between sanctuaries, but by the same token that you would be respectful at somebody else's sanctuary, you would expect them to come and honor yours. Now, while that still continues, I mean, cities still have sanctuaries and still do lots of building in their own places. There are certain places in the world here in the Hellenistic Mediterranean and Near East that are international in scope, and people will come from all over. And it's not just that they will come from all over. When they go home, they will make it clear that they are part of that place from far away. Alexander was somebody who traveled far and wide and opened up this world, and people followed suit for various reasons and then could make their own statement about how they belong to something vaster than their own individual city. And that's must be what the person who, or the couple who was buried behind the grave relief that this the grave for which this is a grave relief was communicating. So you have a married couple, the woman and the man on a couch and on a seat, and in this weird thing that a lot of these Asia Minor grave reliefs have, a horse that seems to be just a little hard to know what the deal is with the horse. I wondered about these horses every time I see these grave reliefs. Like, what's the deal with the horse? He's half in, half out. Why is he in your room? Shouldn't he be outside? Why is there only half of him? What's the horse mean? Everything else looks realistic, but then there's a horse. I think the horses are very confusing. I do not have an explanation for them. And then this the child, or more likely the servant with this, which that the building that Arsinoe built was so famous throughout the Mediterranean because it was so specifically grandiose. It was so large that it would have been recognizable and identifiable to somebody else looking at this. And it is a mark showing that this couple were both initiated into the mysteries of the great gods. Okay, we will finish Samothrace and move on to whatever my syllabus says that we're going to move on to. I think the Attalids and Pergamon. Next Tuesday. Have a great weekend.